Good evening, Dr. Nanda.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Good evening, madam. I used to teach in the days of my youth. I used to teach at this college, and
Yes.
having been the staff advisor for both the Music Society and the Philosophical Society, I was interested to see how this turned out.
Great. I'm so glad to have you with us.
And I'm also a musician. And I've done some work. I started doing some work over the last couple of years on Indian theories of music. And so about the differences between Indian music and Western music in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Indian music has had a very, very long history of theorizing what it is that practitioners do. It's a very learned area. And the theoretical approaches are very, very different.
Yeah, true. And as I said, I used to play, and I still do play a little bit the guitar. And I've joined a choir over here in Hyderabad. I'm in Hyderabad, and I've joined a choir. And the differences between the equitempered scale and the just intonation scale, I never realized what a great difference there is, you know?
Yes.
And it began with actually a statement by Yehudi Menuhin, who actually made a critical comment about the equitempered scale, about how it is it sounds odd in some places. And there's another book which I tried reading. It is about how equal temperament ruined harmony. You know,
I was going to praise that. That was written by my colleague Ross Duffin.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've been doing. I am interested in this area, but I'm now more interested in the Indian music, Carnatic music, especially Carnatic music theories, and I'm learning some percussion. I'm learning some percussion. This thing's called konakol, which is the percussive syllables, the recitation, which forms the basis for learning all the various percussive instruments in Carnatic music. You know?
That's great. Oh.
So yeah, so I mean, I am hearing your talk, but I must warn you beforehand that I'm here. You know, today evening is a busy evening, so you might find me missing for 5 minutes in between, in the middle, 5-10 minutes in the middle. But I'll listen to your entire thing and I'll get back to you. Okay. Thank you. I think it's time. I think we should start. No.
Yeah.
I'm very honored to have you.
Yeah.
So carry on, please.
All right. So, okay, let's begin. Thank you everyone for joining in. And yeah, so I'll just give a short introduction of our speaker. Dr. Susan McClary is a distinguished American musicologist and the Finette H. Kulas Professor of Music at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. McClary is widely regarded as one of the most influential figures associated with the new musicology movement. This movement challenges the traditional positivist approaches to musicology, advocating instead for interdisciplinary methods that incorporate cultural analysis, anthropology, aesthetics, and hermeneutics. Dr. McClary's most celebrated work is Feminine Endings, Music, Gender, and Sexuality, and remains a foundational text in feminist musicology. Above that, she has authored numerous books, journals, and essays. So the format for the lecture today would roughly be Dr. McClary would be speaking for about 45 to 50 minutes, followed by the question and answer round. So Please hold your questions till then. Yeah. Over to you, Dr. McClary.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you. It's a great pleasure. I'm not a philosopher, and you probably have noticed if you looked at my work that I raise theoretical issues, but I try to dive back as quickly as I can to the concrete to deal with the music itself. I am best known for feminine endings and for my work on gender. But new musicology was not really focused on that. What those of us who came to be called new musicologists, that includes Lawrence Kramer, I would say Richard Taruskin, and a couple of others, what we meant to do when we took musicology into an interdisciplinary framework was to bridge the gap between the music itself and historical context. When I entered the field, my God, in the 1960s, the musicologists did almost exclusively archival work. That's what we were trained to do. We were to find a little known composer because they assumed that we knew everything we needed to know about the great composers. And we were to then go off into the archives and try to find things of a factual nature. Music theorists, on the other hand, dealt only with the formal dimensions of music, with formal processes, with syntax, with no concern with where any of these conventions arose and why they might have come into being. And so what a number of us did, and we weren't a collective, we found ourselves all asking these same questions. How can we bring the music itself and historical context together? And how can we use music as a source of information, the way we do when we read philosophy or literature or look at paintings? There was just this abyss between labeling chords, labeling the parts of the forms on the one hand, and then finding details about where Josquin moved after he left this place. Did he stay over at this place? This very detailed kind of archival work. I don't disdain that work at all, but it was not what I wanted to do. I came of age as a musician. I was a piano player. I found myself accompanying everybody else, choruses, soloists, and digging in and trying to figure out how to make the music as effective as possible, how to question passages. Why does it go this way? How do we make sense of this? My most recent book is titled Making Sense of Music, and it's sort of my capstone. It's what I've been doing all my whole career, trying to do this. Musicology recently, even those people who think that they are following in my footsteps, tend to take music and then go into interdisciplinary areas as quickly as possible, and never really refer back to music at all. So it's like a scavenger hunt. You go out, you read Deleuze, and you go, look, I discovered Deleuze. Look how cool Deleuze is. But Deleuze never comes back to the music. It's just, I'm a musicologist and I think Deleuze is cool. And, what I want is for all of this to come back and to produce effective conversations between people in musicology and people in other fields. Strangely enough, more music theorists have followed, I think, in the footsteps I'm interested in. Many of them are concerned now with repertoires other than just the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. They find that in order to answer those questions, they have to interrogate the historical contexts. One of the things that I battle all the time, and you'll see this as we go along, is the idea of absolute music, that there is any such thing as music that operates on its own. I was just having a short conversation with Professor Nanda, and I think he knows that the history and theory of Indian music can't be isolated as just a series of practices. It is completely tied to the rituals, to the belief systems, to the instruments, to the people who have taken part in the development of this very rich repertoire. So that is what I have been concerned with. I go back to music analysis all the time, but I do so for a couple of very important reasons. One of them, as I already pointed out, is when I am coaching performers. I have to explain why do it this way rather than that way. Performers tend to think that they are just expressing themselves and they're doing everything intuitively, but that's largely because they have internalized the way they internalize language, a particular way that they think music ought to go. So when they encounter a weird passage in, say, Schubert, they just kind of say, well, this is weird. I will just make it as musical as I can and just breeze over it without thinking, maybe Schubert really wants to disrupt things when he does that. Maybe you're supposed to respond as a performer instead of trying to bury it and try to smooth it over and make it as comfortable as possible. So performance is important. The other reason that I analyze music is for the purposes of entering in discussions about European and North American history. Music, I will argue and have argued, gives us information concerning history that we can't get through other sources. It is one of our embodied practices. It tells us a lot about the ways that physical deportment was understood at different times, the way emotions were regarded, the way the self is constructed at different times. So to not engage with what music can tell us about the cultures that have produced it seems to me professionally criminal. It ought to be able to enter into those conversations. Also with philosophy, of course. But as long as what we deal with in music is, here are some chords, you're not going to be able to engage with philosophers at that level. I mean, okay, you have chords, okay, so then what? What do we do with this? Professor Nanda was just bringing up the issue of equal temperament as opposed to just intonation. Equal temperament was brought about by various quirks that occurred in the mostly 19th century that required that if we were going to play in all the keys, we needed to tweak them all. So actually, all keys sound equally out of tune if you are thinking of pure intervals, which you would in other tuning systems. There is a novel by the man who just won the Nobel Prize called Werkmeister Harmonies, in which he traces this small town in Hungary. And there is a character who is a musicologist, and he suddenly realizes that in order to play Bach, which he had taken to be the pinnacle of pure order, in order to deal with Bach, you have to destroy tuning. His whole world collapses. He no longer has any kind of metaphysical frame that he can follow because he realizes that the music that he works with in, even Bach, maybe particularly Bach, given the well-tempered clavier, was a lie. And everything in his universe collapses. Now, that is because when we're dealing with perfect intervals, we can kind of imagine that those were given to us by the universe, that there is a metaphysical truth to perfect octaves and fifths, that those are given to us by something that is larger than we are. What happens when you decide, well, okay, who cares if it's really a perfect fifth or not? I'm going to tweak it so I can use it for my own ends. And this novel traces, what happens. When I tell my undergraduates that equal temperament is a historical moment and why it mattered when it did and why it sounds atrocious, they actually cry, some of them, just like the character in this novel, because I have just taken something that we like to believe is pure order and have said, no, it's all based on lies, on compromise. And so that takes us, very much into the center of philosophical questions. When we're dealing with musical practices of that kind, and we find that the reach for transcendence, the reach for something that counts as pure order, is up for grabs when we deal with music. I'm going to talk to you today about Beethoven's Eroica Symphony, his Symphony Number 3, because I think this symphony marks a turning point not only in the history of European music, but really in the history of Europe. And I want to show you by walking you through this piece and talking about the assumptions that are being made and the way that Beethoven is able to pull us into this narrative and make us believe it. What is at stake in that? Historians have always looked to a couple of pieces of history when they deal with and we don't need to see anything, by the way. Let's just listen. Okay. Historians have always dealt with history in a couple of ways when they get to the Eroica. It's about 4 times as long as any symphony had ever been up until that time. It's much more complicated. Orchestra's bigger. There are a lot of details. There are a lot of statistics that you can bring forward. It's also attached to history in a couple of important ways. Beethoven intended to dedicate this to Napoleon Bonaparte, whom he recognized as this sort of revolutionary hero who had pulled himself up by the bootstraps. And then when Napoleon crowned himself emperor, Beethoven was so upset that he went back to his the title page where he had dedicated this to Napoleon, and he scratched out Napoleon's name so viciously that it actually left holes in the paper. Weirdly, he did not replace that page. So that is still the first page of the Aurora. We can still see under erasure, under very violent erasure, that this was intended for Napoleon. So that matters. We also know that this piece was written just after Beethoven had written a letter addressed to his brothers, though never sent, was found in his belongings after he died, in which he says he has realized that he is losing his hearing and of all the senses to lose as a musician. This is the most terrible. He can no longer converse with people easily. He can't hear them, and he can't hear music well. He considers suicide. But then he says that I decided if I was not going to kill myself, I was going to go in a completely new direction in my music. And the Third Symphony counts as his down payment on this new path. Okay, so we all know this. And as historians, we say, okay, you need to know these little nuggets of history. And then we go back to saying, well, it's in E flat major, and the development section starts at this place, and then the recapitulation starts here. And oh, there's this weird place in the middle where it goes into E minor. And, so then nothing has anything to do with history again, right? I want to treat the Eroica as a historical document today, and show you why it matters. First of all, one of the things that Beethoven introduces here is the notion of music not as symmetrical and as something that is situated within a nice formal plan, but as something that traces the act of becoming. It is a process. And that is extremely important. The musicologist Scott Burnham has written a book called Beethoven Hero, in which he explains that that's actually the hero of the piece, the Eroica, the heroic, not really Napoleon, and that it traces a kind of self-fashioning, something that was extremely important in the decades after the French Revolution. Up until then, you were born into a class, you're likely to die in that class, whether as an aristocrat or as a merchant or as a peasant, you were pretty much locked in. But with the French Revolution and the deposing of aristocracies, suddenly there was this idea that you could make yourself up if you had the ingenuity, if you had the stamina to do that. And so self-fashioning becomes an extremely important dimension of this piece and of almost every dimension of European culture after that time. It traces a hero's journey, a self-made man journey. The music theorist Heinrich Schenker says of narrative, in the art of music, as in life, motion toward the goal encounters obstacles, reversals, disappointments, and involves great distances, detours, expansions, interpolations, in short, retardations of all kinds. Therein lies the sources of the artistic delaying, from which the creative mind derive content that is ever new. Thus, we hear in the middle ground and foreground a dramatic course of events. So that is really something that really only pertains to the eroica and afterwards, though we like to think of it as some kind of universal, as Schenker seems to suggest in that quotation. So the question that I ask my students when we deal with this piece is, how does Beethoven go about producing content? Where does this length come from? A first movement that's as long as most full symphonies, with all the four movements put together. How is that done? Well, as Schenker says, we have denials of cadence. We have interpolations, things that come in from left field and interrupt what seems to be the course for the hero's journey. And I'd like to walk you through just a few important passages in this piece and then talk about what I understand to be occurring. At the beginning of the piece, we have two very, very loud chords. I'm going to play for you the recording by John Eliot Gardner because he uses original instruments, including original timpani sticks. It wasn't until Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique that we wrapped the ends of drumsticks with wool to dampen the sound. Beethoven's timpani had a much sharper sound, almost sounds like gunshots. The piece is going to have to rise to the level that those two chords lay out. We're going to have that much of a span and that volume and that sense of authority. The first theme, when it starts off, is scarcely a theme at all. It keeps going back to its final, its tonic, its first scale degree. Bum ba dum bum bum ba dum bum bum. You know, it doesn't know where it's going. So it dum ba dum ba da 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 bum, and then it falls into a hole. Bum ba bum. Well, I mean, that is no way to proceed. It trips. It makes a mistake immediately, and Beethoven dramatizes the fact that this is a mistake because all the other instruments come in and go, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, until we manage to get back to the tonic again. Then we try it again, and we think we're going to inch forward, and kind of we push it to the next level. So this is a theme that is very, very strongly disabled. It doesn't know where it's going. It doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up. It certainly can't stand up to those first two chords we hear. So I just want to play that opening.
Yeah, Eroica's Guardian, right? Yeah. Let's take it off there. Thank you. We could use more volume if that's possible, but otherwise it's just fine. So we hear this theme that isn't really a theme. We hear it struggling for continuation, for some kind of
what am I doing? Where am I supposed to go? Um, and Beethoven resorts to violence in order to come up with some kind of stability, not only with respect to those gunshots, but also he seems to be exerting so much effort that he knocks the rhythm apart. So instead of bum 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 bum, it suddenly is going bum 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 bum. You can hear the effort, you can hear the crisis, you can hear how difficult this is. Now, we come to the next section. Typically, we would have a second theme here. Beethoven gives us a whole string of other stuff. It's not clear what any of them means. They all break off very, very quickly. There's a sense of bafflement. I mean, what are these things? And the bafflement is actually kind of enacted. You can hear, okay, here's this. Well, where did that take us? Let me try this. Nah, that didn't work. He finally goes into a rage. And at the end of the rage, he finally is able to attain his key area again, to end up the exposition of the piece. So let's listen to that next part. So we've managed to come back and assert the identity of our main key, a theme that is clearly related to what we heard at the beginning, but the force that is necessary in order to maintain that identity is really palpable. Now, the middle section of the piece is one of the brilliant sections of all European music, and I'm not going to go into that. What I want to do is to move forward to the very end of the movement. One of the things that happens in the course of the middle section of the piece is that this theme that has never known where it was going. It always goes ba-da, ba-dum, bom, bom, always back to the beginning. Figures out that if it annexes one of those funny themes that popped in, if it annexed the one that goes bom, 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 it can escape the gravitational pull back to the tonic. So it's going to start going not dum ba dum ba da 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 dum, but ba da dum ba da da bum bum ba da dum ba da da bum bum. So it's defied gravity. It has learned how not just to fall back to square one. The other thing it has annexed is that rage music that had the rhythm dum ba dum da dum da 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 dum. With that, it has the fuel and energy to plow all the way through to transcendence. But it can do so only by virtue of having annexed these other things that seemed like they were just non-action figures, but they become necessary to the self in order to produce its conclusion. So if we can listen to just the end. Okay, we actually skipped an example, but that's okay in the interest of time. This is the very end of the whole symphony. And what happens is that we seem to have a glorious, triumphant arrival, and then it falls apart. It completely falls apart. It's as though we are back being that that poor little theme at the beginning of the first movement that didn't know where it wanted to go. And so he stops and sort of digs his heels in and just goes for broke. And it's as though that violence is necessary for survival. It's an existential issue. As soon as he lets up on the volume, on the effort, everything falls apart again. And that means closure is always provisional. It can't ever end. You always are going to have to be fighting over and over and over again. That is not the way the symphonies of Haydn or Mozart work, in which there is effort, but it's always rounded off. The amount of energy that it takes to go from here to there is then released, and we can have something else. In Beethoven's Eroica, every time you seem to let up pressure, you risk falling apart. So it is an existential process that he is giving us here. And the violence is justified because it's necessary for survival. Now, what kind of self is this? And I want to say that Beethoven himself turns away from this fairly rapidly. He writes pieces like this for less than 10 years before he himself begins to call it into question. He begins to go to strange keys that do not support this kind of violence. He writes things like his Holy Song of Thanksgiving, in which he goes back to the old church modes, to the Lydian mode, to say that the tonal system that allows the to produce its narrative is never going to be healing. It is not going to give us any kind of road to God. And he deliberately turns back to the church modes. He writes music of extraordinary beauty and vulnerability and tenderness, none of which is present really in what I have played for you. But for all that those might be my favorite passages in Beethoven, those are not the models that that were chosen as the way our world is supposed to go. It is the model of the Eroica that sheds its shadow over us even today. I would say that the Eroica is still, in a lot of ways, our template of the ways that people in the West understand themselves and understand their countries. We are seeing this played out on the world stage right now. It is necessary for our existential survival that we start wars, that we do whatever is necessary, because otherwise we fall apart. So there is a lot going on here. This came clear to me when I was teaching this piece, which we have to teach every year. I watched the movie The Joker and realized that that movie was just the Eroica. You know, this sort of deformed person who works and finally ends up having blown up Manhattan and stands on top of a taxi cab going, yay. You know, I mean, the process is exactly what I just described. Action movies are all based on the Eroica. This is where we are. Now, that means I'm jumping ship now from a purely musical domain and into others. And for this, I find the work of Raymond Williams very useful. Williams has an idea called structures of feeling. And what he writes is, what we are defining is a particular quality of social experience and relationship, historically distinct from other particular qualities, which gives us the sense of a generation or of a period. The relationships between this quality and other specifying historical marks of the changing institutions, formulations, and beliefs. We are talking about characteristic impulse, elements of impulse, restraint, and tone, specifically affective elements of consciousness and relationships, not feeling against thought, but thought as felt and feeling as thought. Practical consciousness of a present kind in a living and interrelating continuity. So what I'd like to argue is that it's not just musical style that shifts with this, that this is actually going to shape many dimensions of the 19th century in Europe. Novels will follow this. Novels in the 18th century are epistolary. They're letters from one person to another. You know, suddenly they become these stories of conquest. Darwin moves from a world in which biology is concerned with taxonomy, putting everything in its cubbyhole, to, well, we started off as microbes, and then we became vertebrates, and then we became apes, and now we are human. Marx is based on this. Economy is now understood not as something that is stable, but something that is always on the move, always sloughing off what it was that it was at a previous moment. And Freud, obviously. If that first movement isn't a Freudian structure, I don't know what is. And Beethoven did it 100 years before Freud ever thought about it. I might mention also the annexing quality of this piece, the fact that it has to absorb the other in order to survive, is a kind of logic of 19th century colonialism. So we have a lot of things at stake here. That are, and the fact that this is embodied in sound and affects us physically. We respond to the violence, we respond to the moments of triumph, we respond to all of this physically without really knowing why and how it is acting on us. This makes it a very, very powerful model. Yeah. Actually, I was going to go into an earlier moment of music history, but maybe this was enough. And we can let go of that. And just stay with what we have just listened to. Beethoven takes a number of 18th century conventions of tonal process, of decorum, of relationships between self and other, and blasts through them, really like a wrecking ball. He unleashes a lot of raw energies. The 18th century, the age of reason, the musical processes of the 18th century had been influenced by an aristocratic world that wanted energies, but wanted them to be contained. They wanted decorum. They wanted courtly behavior. That's what gets wrecked in the Eroica. Now, the Romantic generation, the generation that follows Beethoven, namely Schubert, Chopin, maybe even Liszt, all were political progressives. They all understood music as potentially utopian, but they also realized that their utopia was up against a kind of nameless power. And in piece after piece by Schubert, by Chopin, by Liszt, you find that the main theme is brought low, is destroyed by some kind of sort of nameless power and violence. That was what was being brought to the attention of the listeners at that time. Then the failed revolution of 1848 occurred. Progressive politics in culture and in the arts suddenly were dismantled violently. It no longer became possible to give these stories of the self that is being destroyed by external forces. And the powers that be then set about, started destroying all sense of wokeness, what we would call wokeness in the United States. That is cheering for the underdog, drawing attention to this sort of nameless, amorphous power that is putting everything down. The reactions of musicians to the 1848 revolution when it failed was either to go into exile, as Wagner did. He spent 10 years in Switzerland. There was a price on his head for the art he was doing. Many musicians fled to the Americas, where they felt that they would be able to practice what they were doing with greater freedom. The ones who stayed behind invented this thing they called absolute music, in which they disavowed that music could have meaning at all. So then here are just some notes. What's the problem? You are upset that I just put these notes together. It's just absolute music. Nothing going on here, nothing to look at. We find this also in poetry. Charles Baudelaire wrote once in a letter, I will swear up and down that my book, Les Fleurs de Mal, is a work of pure art, and I will be lying like a con man. So if you wanted to continue to tell these stories in European music, as Brahms does, as many people who fly under the flag of absolute music do, you have to say, no, nothing going on here. It's just chords and forms. They can't hurt you. Nothing going on here at all. Musicologists and music theorists forgot where this idea came from, and they took it literally, that there really wasn't anything going on in music. For a very long time, until new musicology, most musicians felt that there was no meaning in music. You couldn't talk about music and meaning in music. It was just absolute. You could talk about these sort of childish things in which composers responded pictorially to texts, but that wasn't real music. Real music was just chords and forms, completely abstract and completely devoid of risk of churning up the powers that be. As a result of this, in new musicology, we have a lot of people who are involved in a recovery process in which we are painstakingly using hermeneutics using topics, using affect theory to reconstruct what an audience member in the 19th century would have taken for granted. We've had a very long time of deliberate amnesia, sort of an induced coma with respect to musical meaning. So we are now in a place in the United States where talking about meaning in music has become dangerous again, especially when it's concerned with gender, especially when it's concerned with sexuality, especially when it's concerned with racial difference. I hope that we do not back ourselves into another moment where we disavow meaning because it's too dangerous to talk about meaning in music, because that's what we're up against. So I just want to say at the end, that's why I have been calling on musicologists to come back and pay very critical attention to the music itself. Because if we don't talk about meaning in music, nobody's going to. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that great lecture. I really got a lot out of it. We can open the floor now to questions. Whoever has questions, please just raise your hand, and we can. Ma'am, go ahead.
So my question is that in an age where music is consumed rapidly through digital platforms, how can students like us cultivate deeper meaning and more reflective ways of listening? Because I listen to a lot of music, but again, I want to cultivate some meaning through it. Being a philosophy student, right there.
Right. The same problem that I've been talking about in classical music studies also obtains in a lot of popular music studies. So when I speak at the International Society for the Study of Popular Music, I make the same kind of argument. Many people who study popular music think that, well, okay, the words have meaning, so let's just talk about the lyrics, or let's just talk about audience makeup, or let's just maybe interview a group of teenagers and say, well, this is what they thought. So the same kind of problem occurs. When I teach popular music, which I do, I try to explain what are the components in the music that are creating meaning. Obviously rhythm is part of this. How is the rhythm instructing your body to move? How is it a pure landscape? Nothing occurs, which is one of the things we might find in electronic dance music. We just want to have that high that goes on for a very long time. There's a lot of trance music in South Asia, and also increasingly in the West, that allows for a kind of trance state, a way of appearing to leave the body entirely and existing on a different level. That's really, really powerful. How's that being done? How do musicians trick you into thinking that? And have been for like ever. Almost all ritual music aims to create that effect. It's a very, very powerful effect. So, you can certainly just enjoy the music and the words and be there, but you can also start to think critically about, well, what is going on here? How do I parse this? I deal a lot with Beyonce. I deal a lot with Black music. There's nothing particular about classical music like the Eroica. all music, insofar as it touches us, is meaningful.
So true, so true.
Yes.
Yes. We have in India, we have different cultures and different musical backgrounds too. Like we have this one genre called Rabindra Sangeet in Bengal, in West Bengal, and you should listen to it. Like, and there are different genres in the south of India as well. So please give it a try. You'll really enjoy them.
Send me a link. Please.
I will definitely email you a link.
Thank you so much. I will listen to it and I will get back to you. I do listen to some Indian music. I didn't take it upon myself to lecture you about Indian music. I am in no position to do that. But I am very interested in Indian music. Right now, I'm working on a project on Philip Glass, who was very, very deeply influenced by Indian music, and changed, I would say, the course of European and North American music as a result. Yeah, I mean, he jumped off that roller coaster ride that tonal music had always had, and it creates a very, very different temporality, completely different notion of the body, completely different sense of the self. And he got that really from working with South Asian music.
Well, thank you. I'll definitely get back to that because Philip Glass is probably one of my favorite composers ever. But before that, Trisha seems to have a question. Please go ahead, Trisha.
Okay. Yes. Hello, and thank you so much for such an amazing talk. This was like really moving and like an experience that's going to stay with me for a really long time. I really enjoyed it. So I'm a master's student and I'm studying philosophy, literature, and sociology. And I'm just about to start my dissertation on Indian independent music or Indian indie music. And I sort of wanted to approach it from a similar lens as you, which is to look at like all the cultural factors that have shaped it, all the history behind it, and how it, like the power structures in the music industry and all of that. And I've sort of like never done this before. So I'm just sort of curious to hear if you have some sort of reading recommendations that I could get into, or just advice for someone that's beginning research in what you've been doing for a while.
That's a wonderful, wonderful project. Let me say that the reason I can pull so much stuff out of this particular symphony is that it occurs when there is a really clear change. When you have a style that has been going on for a while, it seems to work on its own logic, and it's very hard to do that. But when you're talking about new indie pop, that means there has been some kind of breakaway. So what is it that the music that you are dealing with, how is that different from what it's breaking away from? What are the ideals that it seems to be nurturing? How do you understand why this new way of putting it together matters to the musicians and to the listeners? So, I think you're in exactly the right space to do that, because you can hear this isn't the way they used to do it. So how? Why?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of questions that I have as well. Like, what makes it a genre? Are there unifying themes? And why is it against this sort of like mainstream Bollywood music and questions of that sort? How does the digital platforming change, reception towards indie music? But I was wondering if you had some recommendations of things that I could read, because you've cited a lot of interesting stuff that I've noted down. But if you had any other...
I mean, it would be interesting once you have established what you're doing with your repertoire to go back and find how you hear Bollywood now and what the values are that are being articulated with that music. So you can go in both directions. There's this weird little book that was published in the late 80s by an economist, a French economist named Jacques Attali. It's called Noise, or bruit in French. And he argues that the whole history of music is a battle between what gets to count as music and what gets dismissed as noise. And he sees that things that are understood to be noise initially then come to be embraced and to shape the next generation or the next era. But it's always this moment of tension between what has been accepted as this is music and then what's that stuff, right? And that's where you are. And that's, Beethoven's, our audience was appalled by this piece. They were really shocked by it. So those moments when what we take to be noise suddenly begins to make sense to a large group of people, and it becomes then the norm. To go back to Philip Glass, I started working on Glass's music in the 1980s, and he was regarded as anathema in the musical establishment. I gave a talk along with all of his collaborators for his piece, The Photographer. He couldn't be there, but the choreographer, everybody else was there. And so I was asked if I could speak to his music. And the composers in my department were so upset that they demanded that I be fired, that I lose my job, because I had put the prestige of the university behind this charlatan by getting up and explaining how I thought the music worked. Now, all film soundtracks are just Philip Glass, I mean, this is the new normal. Nobody worries about this. But there was a time when what he was doing was such noise. It could not be recognized as music at all. So, identifying these moments where those happen, that's when you have these ideological shifts that are right on the surface. You don't have to dig down to find them because fan bases are going to make the arguments for you. That's just noise. That's just crap. Why do you listen to that? And the fans of the new stuff are going to say, how can you stand to listen to that treacly stuff in Bollywood movies? So it's the perfect place to dig in.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Wow. Okay. This has been a really interesting series of coincidences for me because Philip Glass, as I've said, is one of my favorite composers. And I was going to mention The Photographer myself because along with the soundtrack for Koya Niskatsi, The Photographer, particularly like the first act, Gentleman's Honor, those are one of my favorite pieces of music from him. And I didn't know about what you just said about like him really not being that accepted in the 80s and so on. But what you said after that about like how now, all movie music and soundtracks are just Philip Glass, that's very interesting to me. And that ties on with one sort of more theoretical question that I had noted down when I was reading one of your essays. So this is an example that comes from Adorno, who where the context is basically that there's sort of an impossibility after a truly historical break. There's an impossibility to return to the past. And the example from Adorno paraphrase goes that with Schoenberg's atonal revolution, after it took place, it was, and it's argued still is, of course, possible to go on composing in the traditional tonal way, but the new tonal music has sort of lost its innocence since it's already sort of mediated by an atonal break, and this functions as a sort of negation is working there. And the author who I was reading says that this is why there's a irreducible element of quiche in 20th century tonal composers such as Rachmaninoff. Like there's a sort of nostalgic clinging to the past. So of course that's a different opinion, but this sort of a notion of a break in, say, music, that was something that was interesting to me, that okay, the tonal revolution break happens and that sort of mediates as to come. You can still go on composing in the usual way, but it's sort of a, so could you respond to that, like with the context of Philip Glass, because that's something I'm familiar with as well, and that was a good piece of history that you gave.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, Adorno is my god. I mean, there are lots of problems with Adorno. He really shouldn't have thought that he should talk about popular music because he didn't know anything about it, and he listens with all the wrong parameters and gets himself really messed up. But his ways of dealing from Bach through certainly Schoenberg, Berg, you know, I mean, this is really what grounds almost everything that I do. Doesn't deal a lot with gender. He gets messed up when he does that too. But you know, it was encountering Adorno's work in the 1970s that I suddenly realized how I could do what I needed to do, because he is explaining the ideological components of how music is put together, and why it matters. And I couldn't have done any of this without Adorno. Adorno, you know, it becomes a little less sure of what he's doing. I think he's really grounded in the Second Viennese School. When I teach Mahler, you know, I mean, I got my Adorno book right here. But that is his worldview. He would not have really been able to come to terms, I think, with what Glass brings to the table. There are several things about what Glass does that are not just going back to tonality. I mean, there are composers who do, and you know, most effectively and dramatically, David Del Tredici in his Alice pieces, where we're just back with Richard Strauss, as though nothing ever happened. That is not what Glass is doing. Glass is literally deconstructing tonality as he takes these little nuggets that are goal-oriented, but doesn't allow them ever to come to a resting point. The very last section of Satyagraha, where Gandhi just sings a rising scale over and over again, but it is harmonized in ways that do not actually credit an arrival. That puts us into an entirely different temporality from the hero's journey. One of my graduate students just completed a dissertation on this moment, and sees it as a throwback to the myth of Sisyphus, in which you are constantly pushing forward but falling back. It's a different mythology, it's a different archetype from the hero's journey. Now, if you think the hero's journey is the only game in town, then you're going to think, you know, what's going on and why doesn't he cadence? Why doesn't he reach triumph? Because he never does. He's always going to give us the sense that there is no conclusion. Gandhi is singing that up against Martin Luther King, and with the idea that there isn't this place where the rockets go off because you've made it. There is no such thing. You always are just having to push the rock up the hill, and then you do it again, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. That's an entirely different way of structuring time, from tonality, but also from the Second Viennese School. Boulez quite rightly said that Schoenberg continued to, in his phrasing, in his rhythm, in almost every way, continues to be a completely 19th century composer. And Schoenberg wouldn't have argued with that. He was an expressionist. He was concerned with taking that musical language, freeing it of certain kinds of strictures, but also allowing it to explore others. But with respect to temporality, Schoenberg remains a 19th century tonal composer. That's what breaks with Glass and Reich and minimalism. But I think particularly with Glass, who is so self-consciously taking apart the mechanism that used to fuel the eroica and putting it into a place where it is always going to circle. It's also the way hip hop acts. So it isn't just in composed music, but everything seems to have changed in popular music, in composed music, in film music. Old film scores are, still churning up all of that romantic stuff. And that doesn't make sense anymore. That is not our structure of feeling anymore. I would say that Philip Glass puts on the stage one of the most consequential structures of feeling that we have today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, really did. Any more questions, please raise your hand. Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead, Roshi.
Hello, good evening. My name is Roshni. I had a question regarding analyzing freestyle or like improvisation in music. So when we have something, some piece, like for example, we use some examples from Beethoven. So we have a cultural context, we have a historical context that, okay, this was the time, and these are the artist's influences, etc., etc. So over there, we can kind of analyze and see that, okay, the use of tonality over here has something to do with the violence or the tenderness that the musician seeks to offer. But what about when we have no clue about the musician and we have only and only the piece to judge from? And let's say it's not even a composed piece, it's something which is done on the spot. Somebody's improvising. So, like for example, in jazz, there's a lot of improvisation. Even in Indian classical music, I myself come from an Indian classical music background. So there too, even though we have lots of rules governing us, there are rags and tals, and we cannot break away exactly. But at the same time, when we have a mastery to a certain degree, we are allowed to, freestyle. We are allowed to do things on the spot. So how do we go about analyzing something like that? It may even not be like from an academic point of view completely, even as an artist, even as a listener, how do we go about thinking about what the artist has to do here?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question. I have a seminar I give in my department called Analysis for Historians, where we deal with about 10 completely different ways of making music. And we ask at the beginning, so what is this object that we're dealing with, and what's the objective of our analysis? One of the units is always blues-based musicians. And you always start with what are the premises? I mean, what are the parameters within which the musicians are operating? Whether that is the kinds of things everybody would know in advance in playing a raga, or whatever it is that is you're improvising on. And then I think you start listening to, and I'm assuming that we're doing something that is repeated on recording or something like that, but you start to pay attention to rhetorically, how are the musicians operating within that structure? How are they creating nuance with all of the things that they have available, with rhythm, with pitch, with if there is a standard procedure as there is in blues, how is that being used? And you can then go down into, at least the artistry of the person who is improvising. With respect to jazz, I mean, I deal with, say, Louis Armstrong, just great melodious, fabulous sound. But then you get to someone like Miles Davis. Miles Davis wants to break all of those assumptions in what he is doing. And one of the things he does is to grab onto George Russell's notion of Lydian jazz, again, going back to the old church modes, where you no longer have to go anywhere. So modal jazz is just exploring, a sonority. And so what we go along with one key, and then we take it up a half step, and then we take it back down. And there are no motions otherwise. It's just, here are musicians, and they're operating within this playground. And how are they making use of everything that they have? What are the assumptions? What is the nature of the interactions? Is it completely equal? Everybody operating on the same basis? Is there a clear leader who is calling the shots? I mean, what kind of world is being produced in this improvised context? So you obviously have to get rid of a lot of the things that you think you're analyzing when you're going to Beethoven or Bach or Philip Glass. The questions have to change radically. The details you attend to have to change radically. And I mean, there are just more and more people who are doing improvisation these days. I think it's the only place where they can feel really free in a time when there's a lot kind of weighing us down. And I have a lot of students who have left doing composition per se, and really only want to deal with group improvisation as a result of that. If you look at Darmstadt, the mecca where composers all go every year to show off what they do. Increasingly, what happens at Darmstadt is mass improvisation. And no longer under the whip of Pierre Boulez doing complete serialization, but trying to find ways through music of imagining a different kind of world together as a small community, improvising. I hope that helped.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. I had one more question. This has got to do less with the lecture itself and more to do with your experience as a scholar. So I was looking at your work, Feminine Endings, and I was just wondering what made you take up that project in the first place, because it is a little difficult for me as a student who knows very little how one can even take up a project such as this, where you're dealing with music and you're dealing with gender, because usually we don't think about these things together unless we're looking at lyrics directly. But then here we take something which is so abstract as a note, as a cadence. So how did that come about? Was it your interest in music, or was it your interest in just analyzing the gender structures which led you to this? I really would love for you to just let us into your mind to show us how you ended up in this grand project.
Yeah, I came to it from both directions. I always teach music history in the way that I've been outlining, trying to figure out how musical processes produce meaning. So that I had been doing. I went to the University of Minnesota in 1977, and within a couple of years, became acquainted with the very vibrant music women's studies program there. This was at a time when feminists were changing the questions that were being asked of literature, of the visual arts, of history, and even of the sciences. And all disciplines were being reshaped radically by attention to issues of gender and sexuality. And so I would go to talks that my colleagues were giving, and then I would go back to my music classes, and I would think, does gender have anything to do with music? And you just ask that question, and the answer is, well, duh, all over the place. And so most obviously in opera, is one of the reasons that I use Carmen. I mean, if gender and sexuality are not at issue in Carmen, I just, I give up. So I dealt with that, but I also was dealing with the so-called feminine themes of sonata form. These, you have the masculine theme and the feminine theme, and music theory had used gendered vocabulary forever, but then would pretend it didn't actually mean anything. Well, ask a feminist if it means anything, that the masculine theme always has to subdue the feminine theme. And that's the point of the form, well, duh. So I just found that all you had to do was ask the question, does gender have anything to do with music? And everything changed. Now, I had by that time started giving talks at feminist conferences. Most of the chapters of Feminine Endings started their lives as talks at feminist conferences. And if anything, I was kind of middle of the road when I was at feminist conferences. Everybody else was way more radical than I was. And I was kind of eking along saying, well, maybe this means something. But they were really happy to have somebody trying to talk about music. And then I would go back to my music classes and would try to introduce that. So I start the book with the parable of Bluebeard's Castle, where you get to go into the castle, but you dare not ask what's behind the doors. because there's stuff behind the doors that nobody wants you to talk about. And that was my experience. I mean, I was very sure, very quickly after I asked the question, what does music have to do with gender? I was very sure that I was on the right track. But I had been sort of convinced by being in all these feminist conferences that what I was doing was kind of obvious. And I did not expect the blowback that I got. I had a lot of death threats when I published Feminine Endings. There was a time when the police had to take me out of my apartment and put me in a safe house to protect me from other musicologists. I mean, it was really, really crazy. But that made my career. It was the people who went hysterical over me and about the idea that I had dared to talk about music and gender that I became famous. So it's I was noise with respect to the music that was musicology. I'll put it that way. So my new book has a couple of chapters near the beginning where I go through my own Bildung, how I became what I became and why I did that. That wasn't the first time I had met adversity. I had started off working with 16th and 17th century music and just really theoretical how the grammar works. And even there, I managed to create havoc with people who just got completely hysterical over the fact that I said, I think modes actually do work to structure 16th century music. So I don't know. I always managed to, I put my foot in exactly the wrong place.
They say now good girls don't create history. So by being the bad girl, you created history, didn't you?
Thank you. I think probably that's a good place to stop.
Yeah. Can we have a few more questions? I have one that I wanted to ask. So I hope you have time now.
Yeah, I can stay here a little bit longer.
Okay, so this is a question I had about hip hop, and I might not be able to like put the question very well because I don't know a lot of like formal music terms. But this is something that's been my experience. So early, like I really got more and more into hip hop when I started living in like Delhi again after a very long time, which is like a bustling metropolitan city, as opposed to where I was living, which was quite rural outskirts and whatnot. And I've I've been studying like rhythm analysis, and this is a sort of intuition that I've had that perhaps the increasing appeal of hip hop, especially in like all around the world because it's getting more and more urban in nature, relates to perhaps the way rhythms work over there, like pieces of time and even temporality in hip hop is quite like short repeatable units of time. You see this most in say freestyle, where you have like hip hop is basically music reduced to like the beat and rap, and rap itself is also just rhythm and poetry. So over there it's like it relies on like sampling and looping to produce a musical temporality of like small repeatable units of time. And like my intuition was that perhaps because hip hop originates in like urban areas in the US, and where in its popular form in the 80s and 90s, and it's talking about that sort of experience, does that really come out of these trying to articulate like the rhythms of life in that dense metropolitan environments and so on, which is short, discontinuous? Because one thing I found was that earlier I used to listen to a lot of, say, rock music, and the songs would be quite longer. Even a guitar solo would run on for really long, like Pink Floyd and whatnot. And then back then I couldn't really listen to hip hop. I could never get into it because of where I was living, I think. But now that's most of what I listen to. And when I now try to listen to Pink Floyd, I often find that I don't really have the patience, say when I'm in a public transport system like the underground metro. There, like, it's hip hop which suits more to, like, that sort of rhythm of life that I'm in. And I don't really like, does this make sense? And like, because you talked about hip hop and you work on that as well, so I'd like to hear about that from you.
Sure. The person I would point you to with respect to hip hop is my former student, Lauren Kajikawa. If you haven't read his work, I think you would find it extremely useful. He has written about that moment in the South Bronx where some DJs first started doing dance music. They had virtually nothing. If you look at pictures of the Bronx at that time, the neighborhoods had been leveled to put through an expressway, and there was no concern at all with the people who had been living there. And so a lot of times all they had were broken down pieces of audio equipment like turntables and occasionally a microphone. And they figured out how they could actually create a musical world with just this junk, which was all that they were left with. So scratching, using the turntables as a way of producing rhythmic beats, along with drum machines, along with just pieces of junk is all they had to work with, and yet they were able to build something that was so compelling that very soon it got snatched up and made commercial. I mean, there's still a lot of tension between the improvisatory dimension of Herc, for instance, one of the founding DJs, and what you hear in Rapper's Delight, where it becomes commercialized. I mean, everybody loves Rapper's Delight, but to go back and look at what they were actually doing in those early moments with these pieces of junk in ghetto apartments in nowhere. They had nothing. It's really one of the extraordinary stories that is now the mainstream of music production internationally. That has become the universal musical tongue, starting from these kids who had nothing and who developed something that caught on. The issue of music and noise was especially critical at that early moment. I mean, how can you say that somebody scratching a record, counts as music? I mean, they were using noise really self-consciously. The other book, very early on, theorizing of hip hop by Trisha Rose, called Black Noise, is taking that angle. I mean, what happens when you decide you will adopt literal noise and make it the foundation of a musical process. But Kajikawa, I think, has a lot to offer you. So does Trisha Rose.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. And I also just one small additional question on this was regarding like you had shared your essay on evidence of things not seen, and I wasn't able to make a lot of it, but I did get, I think, the major chunks. And I had a question regarding like, anticipation, like can music like anticipate cultural transformations before they actually happen, because like one of the sort of common wisdoms that Schoenberg's music like articulated the anxieties of Auschwitz and the Holocaust before the event took place. And does that claim make sense, or like how do you figure that, like
Yeah, I mean, I was arguing that Beethoven is in a place where he's anticipating everything that's going to happen. It's not because he has some kind of crystal ball. It's because what he's doing is so compelling that it gets picked up and used as a template in all of these different ways. I mean, Schoenberg is not alone at when he breaks away in the period around World War One. Everybody knew that the world was about to go up, straight up. And Mahler, who dies before the war, you hear this such acute anxiety all the way through Mahler. You hear him striving in Beethovenian ways, and it always is going to crash and burn, just crash and burn over and over and over again. Philip Glass's Gandhi does not crash and burn. He just realizes he has to keep going over and over and over again, right? But Mahler has apocalyptic scenarios all the way through his music. That's not to say that they anticipated what happened in Auschwitz, but these are all Jews living in Vienna, which was a very, very anti-Semitic city. Mahler loses his job because he's a Jew. They all had fled from more eastern parts of Europe and into Austria because of the pogroms, because of anti-Jewish violence that had been destroying villages. So they were all acutely aware of what happens when anti-Semitism gets whipped up. And they were seeing another such moment. So they didn't have to, I mean, I don't think anybody could have imagined the Holocaust. But they did know that that things were going to be very, very bad for Jewish people. And they also saw other groups of people, homosexuals, gypsies, other people who had been othered, also in danger. And all of them were rounded up and put in concentration camps and exterminated. So, it isn't that you see the Holocaust there. Adorno sometimes, when he's talking about Mahler, will use phrases like that. It's this kind of anticipating the Holocaust. It's not that Adorno thought that, he had this vision of Auschwitz. It's that having lived through the pogroms and then finding themselves in that same place again, the anxiety level was very, very high, and no one knew where it was going to go. To switch this over out of just music, Hungary, and which is right next to Vienna, gave rise to all of the scientists who fled, all these Jewish Hungarian artists who had to flee from pogroms and from anti-Semitism. They all came to Princeton University, where they invented the atomic bomb and computers and quantum physics and anything else you want to mention. I mean, this really, really small part of the world just explodes with all of this inventiveness. But they have to leave that area because of anti-Semitism. There is a South American writer named Labatut who has these extraordinary novels about those scientists who were being forced out of Hungary and what they did once they got to the United States. I mean, all of 20th century science is really grounded on what those Hungarian Jews did when they got here. And, you know, arguably our music was grounded on also what those Jews in that very small geographical area were doing at the time. So they were sort of canaries in the coal mine. You have that expression. You know, they used to put canaries down so that if there were toxic gases, the canary would die, and then you'd know you shouldn't go into that part of the mine. So, you know, that's the Jews at this time were working with those kind of assumptions. There was an amazing novel and then film made in the early 1920s called The City Without Jews, which is about Vienna suddenly declares that they are going to cleanse themselves of Jews. The Jews are all deported. In the film, they are loaded onto trains. This is in the 1920s. I mean, talk about anticipating the Holocaust. You know, I mean, everyone, all Jews in that area knew that they were in really desperate straits, and it would get much worse. But I think that we used to think that all the other arts were up to date and paying attention to what was going on in the world. And then music kind of comes dragging up and goes, oh, right, you know, maybe we should do that too. And what I've been arguing, and this is also what Jacques Attali argues, is that music, because you can improvise new worlds in it without any expense, can anticipate the way the world is going to be. I mean, architecture can't do that. You know, you have to pay an architect a whole lot of money to build something, and you're not going to risk anything. But a group of people improvising in a room, or Schoenberg doing these chamber music concerts with his students and closest colleagues, can change a world. I'd say this, you know, same with Kool Herc, you know, in the South Bronx. I mean, who could have imagined? And the culture of hip hop, the ways that bodies present themselves, clothing, sexuality, sexual mores, interactions, behaviors, all of those things are completely shaped by hip hop now. I mean, who could have known this when he's just sitting there with two turntables and a microphone?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very enlightening response. I now hand over to Roshni to just deliver the vote of thanks.
Hello, good evening, everyone, again. So for the word of thanks, first and foremost, all our thanks goes to Dr. McClary. I still remember the day Arihant and we received the email, the reply to our mail, and it filled our hearts with so much joy. We were so excited to have you. Ma'am, this interaction has been very fruitful in all aspects. It has not only fulfilled our intellectual curiosities, but also inspired us to never back down from our quest to question and problematize our world, despite all the challenges that you also give some very dangerous examples of. Next, I would like to thank the members of both the organizing societies, the Philosophical Society and the Music Society, for making this interaction possible. I would like to give our thanks to all the attendees of this meeting. It is very difficult to connect sometimes when there's an online setup. However, here we are, connected despite being so far away from each other physically. It is amazing how interesting topics and our quest for knowledge brings us together, despite all the challenges that we face. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much again. It's been very inspiring, very enlightening to talk to you. Thank you so much. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you. And it was wonderful speaking to all of you. As I said, if you want to continue these conversations, you want to send me links, you want to ask more questions, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Sure. Thank you very much, ma'am. Good day ahead to you, and good night to everybody joining from India. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.